being such a rather cool morning, I thought of what? Warmth. Yes, because I thought of furnace, and furnace warms you up. And the furnace can warm you up a little bit too much at times too, right? So this morning's message is going to be focusing upon one of my favorite topics. A topic which I've preached upon here in the past, but this might have been like 4, maybe 5 years since I last preached on this topic. It feels like so long ago, yet so near. So we're going to go back to the book of Daniel today and talk about the furnace of fire. The furnace of fire, right? During Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through some of this background, and then we'll fast forward right into chapter 3 and see what kind of goes on here. Because the furnace is as a literal type meaning, yes, and also a whole bunch of applications for us as Christians in living in the new covenant here in the world. But first of all, chapter 1, the first 7 verses gives us some background to understand what's happening with the Jewish people, what type of things are they facing, and how are they combating that? How are they going about life? So Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. I want you to start off by knowing we call this book Daniel because of the person we call by what name? Daniel. Keep that in mind. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, one of my favorite names in all the Bible. Isn't that a wonderful name? His name has kind of died out. You don't really go to class and you're talking to your good friend Nebuchadnezzar. It's a bit long name too, but a fun name, interesting. King of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Pause there. Note, he's taking things that belong to the God and is using them to worship his God. Idol worship. Keep that in mind. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, who we know, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those last 3 names probably seem awfully unknown. Where did these names come from, right? The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. So I find it interesting that, with this backstory, there's a whole bunch of backstory going on. It's a change in culture. It's a change in identity as far as name and who they are. They're being roughly encamped to learn and to become Babylonian, is the idea that the king has. To enforce Babylonian-type ideas, ideology, doctrine, culture upon them as people, and then to put them in high-ranking places to then administer that down lower among the land. But notice their names. Do we call Daniel Belteshazzar? No. But yet we always speak of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I ponder why. Don't really know why. I mean, granted the name stuck with a little bit in the story, but why do we call Daniel Daniel? We don't call Hananiah Hananiah. It's an interesting little thought to think about. I have no answer to that question. Think about it. Study it. Look it up later. So let's move on. Chapter 3, the first 7 verses. Now we see the king gets a little bit more of authority, more power. And we see Daniel. We see Hananiah, or we'll call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is we know them most by. They are now in their official places. They've been trained, they've been studied, they've learned, and now they're in authority over some people, in and underneath the king's palace and the king's authority. So here's what the king does. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. When I think of this type of image, we can imagine 90 feet high statue at this point in time. That's quite high. They have no skyscrapers, no real large buildings. This is a rather high structure. And it's made of what? Gold. So it sparkles and it's there for a purpose. It's there for people to go and worship. To go and worship. He then summons the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he has set up. So, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as they heard the sound of the harp, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So what's going on here? Idol worship. That's all this is. Pure idol worship. This is not atypical for the time at which they're talking about here, as various countries, nations have their own idols and gods, quote unquote, that they worship. But it's not also atypical for people today. One nation that comes to my mind is I'm interested and intrigued about North Korea, as I'm sure most people are. It's a very interesting country to study, and they have images of their leading family that if you go to their country, they have you even present flowers before them and bow down, as if they're a god unto you even as a visitor, which I find very fascinating and wrong, but also very, very fascinating. But it's idol worship. But we're also not immune to idol worship in America also. We put a lot of things in front of and a place of God and throughout various parts of our nation. Some people may put money. Some people may put sexuality. Some people may put greed. Others may put falsehood. And others may worship even false gods. Because there is only one God. Yet, idol worship is what this is about. Let's continue on in chapter 3, verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward to the king and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." And that little quote line right there, "O king, live forever," is a quote line that many nations use in reference to their kings even today. Even today. They idol worship their emperor and stuff like that. It's in more than one country. It's kind of a little bit concerning in our world today. "You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." So, accusations are being levied. They're saying, well, why do these three? What's so special about these three? That they don't have to do what you would proclaim to do? That they throw their nose up and don't listen to you, O king? They're starting some trouble because they don't really like them, perhaps, but also they're not following the decree. So these three face a decision, a rather tough decision. The king made a rule, a law, an edict, that you are told to follow, yet you know deep down within that you cannot do it. To do so would be an affront to God himself. Yet the culture tells you you must. The nation tells you you must. But you know you must not. Do you do and go with that which is popular, that which is authorized, that which you're told to do? Or do you do what you know is right to do, what God has instructed you to do, which is you bow down to no other gods, for there is only one God, and He alone is God. These three, as we know, chose to remain true to who they are in God. They recognize they're a part of God's kingdom. They're a part of God's family. They're the family of God. They cannot bow down and worship this false image, and yet still claim to be Jew. Still claim to be of the house of Judah. They can't. They won't. They choose not to. How does the king respond? Would he be happy and say, oh, that's fine? No. Verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Do you notice with the king? It's not about this God's type thing that he worships. It's about my hand. What God can rescue from my hand. It's all about his power, his authority. In the king's mind, it's all about him. He sets up these falsehoods. He knows that he himself, in his own mind, this is his thought, that he alone is powerful over the whole entire kingdom. And no one can stand up before him. He's conquered everybody. He besieged the land. He took control. Who can stand up before him? So he thinks. So the king, he's not too happy. He's rather upset. He gives an ultimatum. He says, okay, here's your chance. I'm going to play the music. And you are to bow down and worship this image as I told you. If you do, very good. We're fine. We're okay. You've got your business. You maintain your level of authority. But if you don't, not only do you lose your position of authority and come down, but into the fiery furnace you go. Which means execution. On the spot. In minutes. How do they respond? Do they even allow the music to be played? They don't. They respond immediately with direct conversation. And they don't go around the bush. Verse 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar. They don't say, O King Nebuchadnezzar. They say, O Nebuchadnezzar. I ponder if that was a chosen way. I don't know. We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it. Pause. Has anybody in recorded history, according to the king, ever escaped the blazing furnace? Nope. Zero. Nobody. Here's these three right in front of his face saying, it's okay if you throw us in, our God's going to save us. The God we serve is able to do it. Whose God? Our God is able, they're saying. And they go on, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, and here's power of faith, even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. That's power of faith, saying, okay, God can save us. Even if he doesn't save us, we're still not worshiping your false God. That's power of faith. What amazing faith to respond by saying, God can save us. If he chooses not to, we're still going to remain faithful. Even if God's answer to our prayer, they say, even if his answer is no, we're still going to serve. We're still going to remain faithful. That is amazing, powerful faith. Daniel 3, 19 through 23. Do you think the king was okay with that response? Nah, not too pleased. Not the most happy king ever. So then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. His attitude toward them changed even so much more, ignited with fire. The blazing furnace is one thing. His rage and anger are probably like 10 times that. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Interesting biblical number there of 7. It means kind of completeness and perfection. We'll get back to that. Times hotter than usual. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So let's pause. Not only does he say, okay, throw them into the furnace, he says, okay, heat it up. More. And give me the strongest guys I know in the whole entire army to come before me. So he's doing everything to up the ante, to do as much as he can against them, to make sure there's nothing that can happen that will thwart his plan of the furnace for their finality. So these men, the men that he chose to gather up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. So they gathered them up just as they were. Didn't have them change anything, didn't have them go anywhere. Just, okay, come here, bind them up, get them together, into the furnace they go. The case command was so urgent, and the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So even the guys who threw them in died, perished, just by getting close to the fiery furnace. So into the furnace they go. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these 3. Next 2 verses. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods. God provided, through very special intervention, freedom from the doom set before the 3 by the king. And God displays his very essence and character and godliness right before everybody there, to show not only is he a God, he is the God. He alone is powerful and able to save, to show himself to Nebuchadnezzar and his ability, so that not even did these 3 escape the fire, they escaped unscathed. And they escaped free. This furnace was heated 7 times over, showing perfection and completeness of fire and of strength and of heat, is overcome in completeness of saving of these 3 men. Saved completely from any scorching. Even their clothes, not a stench of any fire smell. And of course, most of us can attest, we've been to campfires before, right? We've been, the hay rides, nice big campfire. When you come home, if you've been there for any amount of time, your clothes have that nice, awesome smell, right? I love that smell. The nice, good campfire. Some don't love it. It's okay. But I love that smell. Come on, it's like you smell the nice wood fire, and it's wonderful. And it stays on the clothes a little bit. These guys, not even a smell. Not even a smell of any fire. So Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the blazing furnace, and he shouted. He didn't get too close, though, because if he gets too close, he'll die. So from probably here to there, he can come in and see, he's looking, he's shouting in. And he shouted, he says, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. He recognizes God. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, royal advisors crowded around them. Why? They just saw something miraculous. They just saw something unprecedented. They saw something in their mind was completely impossible. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, no smell of fire on them. But notice, those 3 came back out. The 4th, who appeared in the fire, did not come back out. Nor did they enter in, really, to begin with, which is kind of interesting in itself. Nonetheless, then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. Now, again, there's questions as far as who was that in the fire? Was it just an angel, messenger of God? Or was that an example of God using Christ, pre-incarnate, to go in and affect the situation? These are questions for you to think about. And I'll respond later if you have questions. So they trusted in him, he said. They trusted in this God, defied the king's command, willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. Sometimes a story looks like it has to go a certain way, but then things change. Sometimes doom looks imminent. Sometimes a loss just appears inevitable. But then sometimes it's not. Things can change. Things can change. God is able to take something that is meant to destroy his people and use it to display his godliness and his power in and through his people to their growth and building them up. And that's what God has done for us. God has sent his own Son to save us from the fire, to save us from the furnace, so that we come out completely unblemished, unscathed, and not harmed at all by the fires of life, and indeed by the fires of hell itself. And it only comes by the saving grace of his Son, our Lord, our Savior, Jesus. At this time, we're to partake and sing together a song of